Hi there, today we're going to build two of these beautiful side tables using construction grade pine lumber from the home center and then some dimensioned ash for the top. So, gasp, yes, but I'm going to be using some construction grade lumber for the base of these cabinets. But let me show you something. These are not any old 2x4s. Look at how nice and straight those still are and flat after being in my shop for a couple of days. And that's because I went through and made sure I had the densest pieces of wood. As you can see with these really tight growth rings right here and no pit in the board, they're a much heavier piece of wood. And that's because it took a lot longer for this tree to grow versus something like what we see right here. I mean, look at how gigantic those growth rings are. Super soft. That's going to be a very, very light piece of wood that hopefully will stay nice and true, but probably won't. To get this project underway, I started over at the miter saw station, which is a pretty typical place for me to start all of my projects. Over there, I cut down the 2x4 to a length that would allow me to get a couple of legs out of each section with some scrap on both sides in case I had any planer snipe. Then it was a visit to the jointer to make one side flat, and then the planer to make the other sides parallel. Then it was back over to the miter saw station where I used my stop block to cut the legs down to their final length of 22 inches. The reason I wanted to crisp up these edges is you can see right here, the final dimensions are a much crispier, thinner looking leg than a full 2x4. We got our legs together right there, and now it is time to cut our 1x. This is a 1x10 by 8. I actually got a 1x10 by 10 and just cut it down. But I want to cut off the base now, which is 4.5 inches in thickness, as that's my first strip, just to make sure I keep everything in line as I'm cutting all of the 1x material. Let's go ahead and whack that to pieces right now. I started breaking down that 1x material over at the table saw and then took it down to cut it to its final dimension on the miter saw, but we won't show you that part again. We do have some 1/4 and 1/2 inch sheet goods to break down, and I took this opportunity to rip them cross-cut with my circular saw. This is a dusty mess and I sure hope to upgrade to a track saw at some point. Then it was back to the table saw, a much cleaner process to cut those sheet goods down to their final dimensions. So it is time to add pocket holes into all of the cross members here. The biggest thing is, just like here, make sure you have them on the right side, the same side for both sides of the pocket holes. And I guess I don't need these right here because I'm only going to use these two, doing a pocket hole out to both sides, and this is a vertical portion of the drawer. And I will be using my Kreg Jig K5 for cutting these pocket holes. A Kreg Tool pocket hole jig was one of the first things that I purchased when I went down this slippery slope of woodworking. It was an R3 system, which I still have, and right now I am going to be using the K5 system to be cutting all of these pocket holes. You guys know that I have a Foreman as well, but this is a much more approachable and cheaper tool and works fantastic. Right now, if you're interested in getting a K5 or a K5 Master Kit, there is a rebate available for a limited time. Now, Kreg has not sponsored this video. They have an upcoming video that they're sponsoring, but Kreg Tool just makes some good stuff, so I highly recommend you check them out. And now it is time for assembly. We're going to be using some Titebond 2 wood glue in conjunction with the 1 1/4 inch course pocket hole screws. Right off the bat here, I ran into a little bit of a problem where I actually cracked my leg joints by putting those pocket hole screws in. Failure is an option. A quick fix is some Titebond CA glue, throw a clamp on there and let it sit for a few minutes, and then you are ready to go again. A solution that I found was to back the pocket screw in and out slowly so that it made several shallow depth cuts and thus prevented the splitting. Again, it is not about the failures, those will happen, it's about how you overcome, and in this case cover them up, and I'm lucky that I'm going to be lacquering these cabinets so I'm able to cover it up super easy. Once I got that top rail in place, I used the sheet goods that we broke down previously, which is going to make a sort of faux shaker style side here to measure out where I needed that other rail. Again, it was wood glue and pocket screws to get that in place, and then we will add the final rail on the side, and this is set 3/4 of an inch from the bottom, and I used the piece itself to make that measurement. Adding some wood glue and that faux shaker style backer board, and a couple of brad nails makes quick work of fastening that into place. A fantastic, simple, and cheap way of making quote-unquote shaker style doors. If you guys are new here and you like what you see, why don't you subscribe and ring that bell so you never miss when we upload a new video. I would greatly appreciate it, but no pressure. Once you have that back shaker board in place, it is time to cut some of those first 1x boards that we cut off on the table saw down to their final dimensions to add a base to this side table. The two outer sides need to have a cutout to accept the leg of the side table, and those will just fit over the edge like you see right here. Add some wood glue and 1¼ inch brad nails to hold everything into place. My side table was slightly out of square, and nailing these baseboards into place is a great opportunity to straighten that skew out. You can see those clamps I have set up in the background, and that is holding one side square to my assembly table while I straighten it out. Great little trick. There will be a drawer at the top of the side table, and I am making that faux shaker front right here. I did drill a couple extra pocket holes than I needed, but that's no big deal because these will be covered up by that 1/4 inch piece of plywood. Pocket screw everything together for the front, wood glue and brad nails to make your shaker style door. Obviously, we can't have a drawer without an inner carcass, and that is where the 1/2 inch plywood for this project comes into play. Wood glue and brad nails made quick work of this drawer. And moving on to those ash tops that we talked about. These are some 8/4 ash slabs that I got locally from a guy here in Richmond, Michigan. They have been air drying for about 2 years, and they were ready to go after a couple weeks of acclimation in my shop. I cut them down to rough length at the miter saw, and then moved over to the bandsaw to rip out any imperfection or pith that was in the wood. I also needed to make them less than 8 inches to fit on my jointer, where I squared up the typical 2 sides and then moved over to the planer to bring them down to their final thickness of 1½ inches. At the table saw, I ripped the boards down to a dimension that would allow even spacing across the tabletop for a uniform look. And then the kids and I glued up the slabs. Once the glue had set up for a few hours, it was back to the table saw to cut the tabletop down to its final dimensions. Then it was on to quite a bit of sanding. I began with 120 grit sandpaper, moved to 180, and finished with 220 grit sandpaper on my 6-inch random orbit sander. Added a quick itty bitty round over to the top using my trim router, and then moved over to the router table where I added a 45-degree chamfer at the bottom just to give it a little bit of a modern look when looking at the tabletop from the front. And then we used our favorite color of stain, which is Shaker Maple from General Finishes. This is a water-based stain. I highly recommend using water-based stains, although they do have a little bit of a learning curve to make sure you have uniform color application. But once you get the hang of it, they are so much better than their water-based counterparts. And now moving on to finishing our project. For the tabletops, I'm going to be first going with a sanding sealer to seal that stain down, and it kind of acts as a wood grain filler, leaving you with a super smooth finish when you are done. I'm going to be using my Fuji Q5 Platinum sprayer combined with a T75G gravity gun and my PPS 2.0 cup on there, which is just a glorious setup to be using. I applied 1 coat of sanding sealer, sanded with 400 grit sandpaper, and then followed up with 3 coats of General Finishes Enduro Clear Poly. Again, I used the PPS 2.0 cup, which allows you to spray in any orientation, and for this I used a 1.0 millimeter tip. This is the second time I've sprayed this finish with that tip, and it lays down like glass. I could not be happier, and I highly recommend that 1.0 tip with the General Finishes Enduro Clear Poly combination. For the base, I applied 3 coats of Sherwin-Williams Chem Aqua Plus lacquer. This is the same finish that you saw me use on the laundry room cabinets, and I'm using the 2.0 cup here as well, which was instrumental because I can spray in any orientation. Fantastic system. For the drawer, we're going to be putting in a full extension drawer slide, and I'm using a Craig jig to allow me to mount them evenly and easily. To mount the tabletop, I'm going to be using a couple of these tabletop clips, and this allows movement of the tabletop throughout the seasons. Using my router with a 1/8 inch straight bit to cut a groove in the base to accept that clip and hold the top down. Our last step here is to mount the drawer front, and I'm using some Tight Bond Thick and Quick in conjunction with some 2P10 to hold it in place while the wood glue sets up. I used some plexiglass cards to get my spacing right, and we were ready to go. Some rusted brown handles, and we are all finished. Well, that is a wrap on the side tables. We got one right over here, and we got one right over here as well in our newly updated living room. If you guys haven't watched that video, you can catch that right up there as well. I believe that the finish laid down on the tops of these tables is the best that I've ever put down, and I'm very, very happy with the results. If you guys enjoyed this video, please hammer that thumbs up button. Helps us out a ton and gets this video in front of more eyes. Make sure you subscribe because we have a similar table, a little bit different, coming up soon that will house our multimedia. I'm DIYTyler, and you guys have a good one.